Howdy folks, Shell Presto here. Today we're going to discuss my first time using gouache. So for this particular piece, I wanted to do the background in gouache. I particularly heard that Sleeping Beauty, the Disney animations backgrounds were done in gouache, so I decided I wanted to try my hand at also doing backgrounds in gouache. Now I start here not using gouache, but using Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus liquid watercolor. I particularly enjoy this watercolor because you get much deeper, much richer pigmented colors than you would get with regular watercolors, usually from the tube or palette. But there's a trade-off. Once the Hydrus watercolors are dry, they don't pick up or reblend as much when you add water. But I actually particularly wanted that for this background because the gouache that I will be using is M-gram gouache, which I bought specifically because it re-wets and re-blends very well. So I didn't want to lay a thick dark layer of that down on the paper knowing that it would re-blend with everything coming up from it. So for this I mix 2 drops of blue Hydrus liquid watercolor with one of the browns. I'll leave that below in the description so that I could get a really dark layer that won't lift up or blend with the gouache when I start adding the gouache. Now the character that I'm drawing here is Atomic Ranger. Atomic Ranger is one of our original characters inspired by Steve Ditko's original Captain Atom. Our Atomic Ranger was an Air Force officer duped into entering an experimental super soldier program run by the wrong sort of people. He had lost limbs in an explosion, and they promised they could give them back. To their credit, the evil scientists did restore his legs. They also implanted a nuclear battery inside him and bonded alien tissue to him, knowing it would kill him. I guarantee that it's an interesting story, and it ends with him joining the Challenger Foundation. But what you need to know for this piece of art is that his skin is bright mac and cheese orange and glows, which is a challenge when painting because I have to express that. I'm happy to say that the M-gram gouache, with its lifting capabilities and reblending capabilities, did handle the effect quite nicely. And I like how it turned out. It was pretty easy, although it took a little bit of work to reblend the areas immediately around Alan Adams to get that effect of glowing. Now with the background, I wanted it to contrast with Atomic Ranger, so I put a lot of greens, and I used the yellow shifted, blue shifted slightly, azo yellow, and even mixed some greens in with all the background colors, just so they would be slightly blue tinted to contrast with Atomic Ranger, who's obviously bright orange, warm colors, and I have his shirt bright red and his jacket warm brown. So I thought that would create some contrast and make him pop off the page more. Now, when I'm using a ruler with my brush like this, I'm not laying the ruler down on the page. I'm actually holding the ruler up a couple inches off the page and only laying the tip of the ruler at the top of the page so that I don't get paint stuck to my ruler. And the fun and useful part of gouache, as opposed to watercolor, is that you can paint lighter areas over darker backgrounds. With watercolor, you have to go from light to dark, and once you've gone dark, it's very hard to go back to light. With gouache, you can lay a color down and then paint either dark or light over it. That ability felt particularly useful in this night scene, because it allowed me to focus on the slight areas of light that you'd see, like when I draw the train tracks later. And even on the grate immediately behind Atomic Ranger's shoulder, I'm able to focus on the scant light parts that you would see and sort of make fewer marks suggesting what you see, as opposed to harsh marks that describe everything. And I think one of the beauties of painting in general is trying to figure out how few lines you can make to represent what it is you're trying to draw. In no small part because the fewer lines you make, it's easier. And when you want to do a lot of artwork and you're illustrating books and things like that, you know, quick and easy is super helpful. So I feel like the gouache did do its job in that. I feel like this background didn't take me too long, especially for my first attempt using gouache. And I feel like it didn't do too much work, but it came out suggestive of what I wanted it to be, which is a subway station that's kind of lonesome without too many people, alone at night. An above ground subway station, of course. Also, the M-gram watercolor, I think, blended beautifully in the far distant background. When you do a night scene, usually it gets to a point where the horizon, where the sidewalk and the road and everything go back into the distance, and where the sky begins, it gets a little blurred because it's dark and you can't see that far back. And I think that the gouache allowed me to get rich, dark color, but also to sort of blur that line so that you don't see it that well, instead of having a hard horizon line. I really appreciated the gouache's ability, like as I lay down these light posts, I can go back in with some water or slightly darker paint and blend out the ones that are further back so that they seem further back, because they get darker as they go backward. Or when I add the light on them, it's very easy with this to add a little more water or add a little more paint and reblend it out to get that glowing effect. The paint is so blendable, though, that you need to watch out when you're going over top of things. The drier you keep the paint, the more solid it goes on without blending underneath it. So say for the texture on the sidewalk closest to Atomic Ranger there, I went in and dry brushed that texture on with my fan brush. And you have to keep it dry. If you wet it, it's going to reactivate, and if you keep the brush very wet, it's going to reactivate the paint underneath, and then you're blending. You're not putting that solid color down. I've heard other artists say that if you keep the first layer of gouache very thin, it doesn't blend as much either, but this was my first time using gouache and I was just having fun with it, so I I laid the gouache in pretty thick on my first layer down. And I don't regret it. I think it turned out okay and looked all right. But like I said, I'm just learning with it. I think the painting could have turned out a lot messier if I didn't use the Hydrus watercolor for the background. I know James Gurney on his videos constantly says that he uses casein. That won't lift up either, just to put the first layer down and get some color there. But you experiment with things and you do what you like. And you do what works for you. That's the most important part. Some people will insist that there's right or wrong ways to use certain mediums or to go about certain things, and it's good to take suggestions and try them out for yourself. But at the end of the day, especially with illustration, you know, you need to go with what gets the job done and what gets the job done in the time frame you need it done. So this obviously wasn't a full review of the gouache or anything. I was just playing around and using them for the first time. But I gotta say I enjoyed it, and the M-gram gouache felt really smooth going on, and the colors themselves appeared very smooth, whereas sometimes paint can be grainy and the color not well blended. And this is the first brand of watercolor-esque gouache that I've ever used. I have used the acrylic-based designer gouache before, but I did not like that experience because it doesn't lift up, and they seem to dry a lot faster than regular acrylic paints, so you're getting strange texture from them, kind of chalky, like poster paint, but then they dry faster than acrylic, so it's like using acrylics, but without the benefits of acrylics. So I don't particularly recommend the designer acrylic gouache, but this stuff is the more watercolor-esque gouache, and it's, like I said, my first time using it. When you see the final version of this piece, Atomic Ranger will be darkened. I went back in to make sure he really popped. I originally drew him with Derwent watercolor pencils, blended him out with water, then later went in with Winsor & Newton watercolors to darken him some more, because I wanted darker colors with less texture than the watercolor pencils could offer. I hope you guys and gals enjoyed taking this little art excursion with me. If you have any questions or comments about the paint I'm using, or the techniques I'm doing, or about the characters I create, please tell me or ask in the comments section below, and I'll try to address it in a future video. You'll be seeing Atomic Ranger again in the future too, as part of my public domain redesign series. But if you'd like to know more about him, he does appear in our first Challenger Confidential book, Copper Knights and Granite Men. It's a novella, not a comic book, but it's got at least one of my illustrations per chapter. The books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and a few other online booksellers. And any purchases will help this channel because, well, I'm a self-employed artist and author with everything that entails. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel to catch future art videos from me. I enjoy sharing my art journey with you folks, and hopefully I'm imparting a few helpful tips for your art along the way. Most importantly of all though, I hope you have an awesome day. Presto, over and out.